My name is Linda Hayes. I'm delighted to be here today with you. I am sure I'm much more delighted to be here with you today than you are to be here with me, but this is an exciting time, and it's also a period where people have a lot of anxiety about what's coming down the pike. So hopefully today we'll have an opportunity to look at the new system, talk about the new system, reassure you about in the face of some of the challenges, but also get you excited a little bit about the opportunities that it presents for all of us. I am a former teacher, over 20 years in the classroom, a retired principal. I currently work for the Secondary Administrators Association part-time, and I do consulting part-time. I was a member of the original Educator Evaluation Task Force that met with stakeholders from across the state, including representatives of AFT and MTA, to help develop the format for the educator evaluation. We published a report that went to the Commissioner of Education. He looked at that report and made recommendations to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and it was those recommendations that became regulation for the new system. So, hopefully we'll be able to explain the system to you today, but also to talk a little bit about how it will be implemented in Sharon and how it will impact you as well. And if at any time you have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hands and we'll try to deal with them. So, our agenda for today is we'll start with a little bit of an activator, and then we'll take a look at the outcomes for our session today. We're specifically going to drill down into talking about the self-assessment piece of the new evaluation system and also the development of SMART goals. There'll be an opportunity for questions, and then there'll be a little exercise at the end where you do a ticket to leave. Now, I appreciate the fact that people come with various knowledges from all kinds of different backgrounds. Some of you may have deep, deep knowledge of SMART goals. And for you, this is repetitious, redundant, and quite boring, actually. Others this may be a new way of looking at teaching and learning in your classroom. So I ask those of you who have deep knowledge already to bear with us. It's important that we all go through the steps together, and it's a requirement by the Department of Education. And if you can contribute at any time and add to the discussion, I really encourage you to do that. So thank you for that in advance. Right now, as a just kind of a little warm-up exercise, on my right, I would like this group to think for a minute about the first question. How many elements are there in the evaluator rubric? The middle group, I'd like you to think about what did it need to adopt, adapt, or revise. And this group over here, what are SMART goals? So if you want to just take a minute and think about it. So, first question, how many elements are there? Someone from this group? 7?
4.
4. Okay. 7 or 4? How many think it's 4? Okay. How many think it's 7? It's actually 33. What we do have are 4 standards. Okay? In addition to 4 standards, we have, I believe, 13 indicators. In addition to 13 indicators, we have 33 elements. So the rubric, if you've had a chance to go through it, and I believe you all have, is overwhelming, quite frankly. As you flip through it and you see all of these standards and all of these elements, it really can be quite overwhelming. If you don't have a copy of the rubric, if you don't have it online, there are some hard copies in the back.
Everyone should have it now. If you want to check your email, I just sent you one. It should be attached now. Yeah.
And there are different rubrics, so make sure you're looking at the rubric that's appropriate for you. there are teacher rubrics, but there are also some specialist rubrics as well.
I just heard some people saying who are guests in the building and they'd like to be able to connect so that they can get your email.
Okay, hopefully everyone's all set to go now. What does it mean when we talk about adapting, adopting, or revising? Someone from this group?
We were thinking that adopting is when districts take on the new evaluation system, adapting it to meet their needs of the professionals, and then revising it is then changing it from there.
When the educator evaluation system was rolled out, it was rolled out first in 2011, 2012, and it was rolled out to level 4 schools in the state and a group of 12 schools that volunteered that have been referred to as early adopters. And the next school year, this current school year, 2012, 2013, all of the Race to the Top districts have been expected to begin rolling out this evaluation system. Next year, all districts across the state, regardless of whether or not they're Race to the Top, will be expected to roll it out. When it was initially presented to people, the department presented it in this way, contractually. You can look at the model system, it is a model. You can adopt it per se, just as it is, and basically take on the model system the department has developed. You can adapt it to your individual school and district, or you can revise it. Now, if a district decides to adopt it or to revise it, they must submit their adaptations and their revisions to the department. If they decide to adapt it or revise it. If they adopt it per se, they don't have to submit it. They just agree they're adopting it in full. That's part of the contractual ongoing negotiations that districts have relative to whether or not they want to revise it in some way or adapt it in some ways. All districts have to, however, meet the general expectations and requirements of the model system. So even though you can do some adaptations and some revisions, they're within the certain parameters of what the model system has in place. Anyone have any questions on that? Okay, and what's a SMART goal? That is. Excuse me?
The M is measurable.
Right,
So it is an acronym?
yes.
So it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely.
Yes. And it's also, excellent. But there are also other ways of rolling out SMART goals and looking at them. That's the generally acceptable definition of it. We're going to talk a little bit more today about SMART goals, and you're going to actually have an opportunity to sit down and write some for yourself. Because SMART goals are an integral part of the new system, and very, very important as the system progresses. So today, we will take and have a general look at the requirements of the new evaluation system. We'll spend some time talking about the self-assessment component of the evaluation system. We'll also talk about the challenges and the opportunities. As I pointed out to you, the regulations were adopted in June of 2011. They were implemented in first with the level 4 schools and the early adopters, then with all Race to the Top districts this year, and then non-Race to the Top districts starting in September, and that would be Sharon. The evaluation system, at the core of it, is a 5-step cycle. And in that 5-step cycle, probably the most important aspects of it have to do with development of SMART goals, or SMARTer goals, as the department likes to refer to them, a self-assessment piece, educator plans. All educators under the new system will be on an educator plan, and Central to all of this is the collection of evidence. Collection of evidence around student learning and implementation of goals. This is an outcome-based evaluation system. And one of the things that's core to it is the impact on student learning, growth, and achievement. Carla Brooks-Bear, you may know who Carla Bear is. She was a superintendent for many years. She went to work in the Department of Education, and she was responsible for the implementation of the regulations that the board passed in June of 2011. She has talked about the fact that this new system is really about trying to get effective teachers in every classroom and effective leaders in every school, and having them work together to close the achievement gap. The achievement gap, when we talk about the achievement gap, we're not just talking about that gap between some of the high-performing districts and the lower-performing districts. We're also talking about the achievement gap in individual classrooms and schools between the higher-performing students and the lower-performing students. Core and central to this, from the department's perspective, is closing that gap. Keeping students learning and growing at the highest levels, and also helping students to move up and close the gap in between those highest achieving students and then students who are not quite as successful. Carla likes to say, and she said it when she was doing the early workshops on evaluation, evaluation always appeared to be done to educators. And what this new system tries to do is have evaluation as a process with educators. Central to this evaluation system is the involvement of the educator, whether it's a classroom teacher, a specialist, or an administrator. It can't work without that involvement. So, the system now, as an overview, has 4 standards, 4 performance standards. When the system was initially proposed, there was a lot of discussion among the task force and with the department about making sure that this was a consistent system across the board. So, classroom teachers have 4 performance standards, school administrators have 4 performance standards, superintendents have 4 performance standards. It's aligned and consistent across the board, keeping in mind different responsibilities that each of those categories of people have. There are 4 performance ratings. Anyone know what they are? The highest rating is exemplary. The rating that is fully satisfactory and expecting to meet all teachers is proficient. The lowest rating is unsatisfactory, and the 4th rating is needs improvement. It's important to understand in this system, and there was a lot of discussion about this before the system was developed, that there's a cultural shift here. Rather than expecting all teachers, specialists, and administrators to be rated at the toppest, highest exemplary, as has been the case in many schools for years and years. Everybody was expected to get the best ratings. Now, the state districts across the board, we believe that proficient is a fully satisfactory rating. There will be some people who exceed that, and they will be rated as exemplary. There will be a few people who do not meet that, and they may be rated as needs improvement, or in particular cases, they may be rated as unsatisfactory. That rating is also tied to the type of plan every educator will be placed on. That in addition to whether or not they're a new administrator or a new teacher as well. All educators will follow a 5-step evaluation cycle. Doesn't matter if you're the classroom teacher, the building principal, or the superintendent. And all educators will be placed on either a growth or improvement plan, or there also should be up here as a development plan. New administrators, new teachers will be placed on development plans. These are the 4 standards. Okay? Want to take a look at those for a minute? I don't want to read it to you, so I'd like you to just take a quick look. I think it's important to remember that this is a system that also will apply to your building leaders, and they will be judged based on their instructional leadership, their management and operations, and also how they interact with families and communities and professional culture. Teachers will be rated on curriculum, planning, assessment, teaching all students instruction, and then engagement and professional culture. And there are certain pieces of this process that have been built in to tie into these 4 specific standards. The standards, by the way, are broad categories, very broad categories of skills and knowledges that educators are expected to demonstrate and have. One of the standards talks about teaching all students. And I'd like you to take a minute, turn to a neighbor, talk for a minute about your classes, your students. What does it mean to you as a classroom teacher, as a specialist, to be teaching all students? I want to take a minute. It's an incredibly challenging aspect of your job. And what's truly amazing in many ways is as society has changed and people have become more and more specialized in so many occupations, educators have actually had to swing the other way and become much broader and better at reaching out and meeting the needs of all kinds of diverse populations. It is a huge challenge and really can get to the crux of whether or not you're successful in helping your students to learn and grow and achieve. So the conversations around this should continue constantly. And 5 minutes to talk about it, I don't want to minimize what this really is about, because you and I know how deep this goes and how challenging this is. And we could talk about a lot of things. We can talk about differentiating instruction. We can talk about all kinds of ways of meeting diverse needs. But this is a very complicated and challenging issue for all teachers and administrators. If we look at the rubric, this is an important part of the rubric. And if we look at the teacher's rubric or the administrator's rubric, but at this point we're focusing on the teachers, we see that there are standards, which are these very broad categories of skills and knowledges that teachers are expected to exhibit and demonstrate. There are indicators, which are more specific skills and knowledges aligned with those standards. And then the indicators are broken down into elements, and as I mentioned before, there are 33 elements on the teacher rubric. This is not the rubric, this is just an overview that the department has created for looking at the rubric. And if you look up at the top, under Standard 2, Teaching All Students, the first indicator has to do with instruction. The elements are focused on quality of effort and work, student engagement, and meeting diverse needs. Do all of you have the rubric, your rubric that would apply available to you? Okay. Because what I'd like you to do now is take a look at that rubric. Look at Standard 2, Indicator A, Element 1. In light of the conversation you previously had about meeting all teaching all students, and so we're talking about at the proficient level, Yes, I. Well, if you look at the very top under provision, take a look at that, and now I'd like you to take a minute, and in light of that discussion, rate yourself. This is a piece of the self-assessment part of the evaluation. Where would you fall? Would you be proficient? Are you exemplary? Needs improvement or unsatisfactory? Take a minute, think about that, think about the discussion you had about teaching all students. Where would you put yourself?
8 on the rubric.
8 on the rubric. Standard 2.
Page 8.
It's also should be in the PowerPoint if it's just easier. Does everyone have the rubric? If you can't find it, could you raise your hand, please? Engages all students and are personalized to accommodate diverse learning styles, needs, interests, levels of readiness. And on that indicator, element 1, quality of effort and work, where do you fall? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you. This is part of the first step of the 5-step process. And this is what's referred to as the self-assessment piece. The self-assessment piece actually has 3 parts to it. The first part of self-assessment for teachers and administrators will be to take a look at student data. Students currently in the class, students previously in the class. How have they done? Where are they? And what success have you had or challenges in the past with helping students grow, achieve, and learn? So when in this process, teachers and administrators will be asked to look at multiple sets of data. Not only will we be talking about in September the students you have now in front of you, but you also need to be thinking about and looking at data from students you've had in the past. And in looking at that data, what are you looking for? You're looking for growth for students, particularly you've had in the past. What are you looking for when you look at the students you are currently have in your class, if they're new to you?
Like a baseline?
Sure. Where are they? What's their profile look like? So in Sharon, in your school, in your team or department, what are some of the kinds of data that you traditionally look at the beginning of the year? Okay, MCAS scores in the MCAS subjects, absolutely. So one of the things you were interested in looking at the MCAS scores for the students you had the previous year, how did they do on the MCAS? What kind of learning took place? Okay, if it applies to your particular subject area. Also, where are the students I'm getting now? Where are they? What are their needs? What other kinds of data would you look at? Excuse me? Okay. What would that tell you?
With kids who score in terms of math and their English language arts,
Okay.
the baseline and their proficiency below or above the other.
Okay. Someone else?
In there, we have a beginning of the year assessment, which we do for secondary school.
Okay, perfect. Exactly. And that gives you a good idea of where the students are who are coming in. Absolutely. Writing samples. Great opportunity to get really significant information about students and where they are, where their skills are. Anyone else? Other kinds of data that you might look at?
IEPs if they have, if they're identified.
Absolutely. How many students do you have on IEPs? What are the particular modifications or accommodations that are required? Not just IEPs, but also 504s. Okay? Anything else?
Maybe students that we identified needing some extra support reading and math through reading and math specialists, QRI or some math data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now that's another one. Do you have ELL students? That's an important consideration. And if they're ELL students, what data do you have on them to tell you where they are in fluency and where they are in their skills? So all of those kinds of information, that data is available to you. And all of that becomes crucial in your self-assessment of how you've done in the past and where you're going in the future, and what some of the challenges and needs will be over the course of the year. So that's one piece of the self-assessment. That's one part of it. The second part of it is taking a look, just as you did, at that rubric and trying to identify where you are skill-wise and all of those elements, all of those indicators. Where are you? Everyone has great successes. Almost everybody, if not everyone, has great challenges. Where are your challenges? What do you want to work on? What are your successes? What might you share with somebody else because you have been successful in that area? That's an important part of the self-assessment as well. And then the third part is really beginning to think about proposing some goals for yourself. Goals that are based on your students and how you've done with your students, and also your own self-assessment. On the self-assessment rubric, you will be asked to look at the rubric, to assess your current performance. Refer to that sheet now in order to continue with our next discussion. Each indicator needs to reflect your performance in one of the following categories. Now you're being asked to take a look at the full rubric and rate yourself in all of those areas. And I believe, Mr. O'Rourke, that we had talked. Do you want to move out now, or can we do that here? Are you comfortable doing it here? Okay, great. Could you work on that right now? Does anyone need the rubric? Does everyone have it either electronically? If you need hard copies, there are some.
Yeah.
If you look at the performance levels in the model rubrics, you'll see that there is performance descriptors here. We have exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, and unsatisfactory. As part of the self-assessment piece, you will need to look at this rubric and determine where you are on each of these indicators and in each of these elements. So in this case, the educator's performance fully and consistently meets the requirements of a standard. That's proficient. Proficient is the expected rigorous level of performance for educators. It's demanding but attainable. And at the proficient levels, educators integrate the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for effective content area instruction or leadership. Again, proficient is fully satisfactory. To be rated proficient means that you are reaching rigorous expectations and standards. So when you look at the rubric, one of the reasons the rubric's been presented to you and it's kind of highlighted in the proficient column is that for many people, that's a good place to start. Take a look at what the proficiency is. Decide if you meet that. If you think, well, I may not completely meet that, take a look at what the needs improvement piece is in that element. If you still don't meet it, you might want to look at unsatisfactory.
Can you just clarify how there are two different rubrics back there for specialists, teachers,
Right. Yes, you should, if you're a regular education teacher, you should have the teacher rubric. There are also rubrics for specialists, including special educators. You want to make sure you're looking at the correct rubric.
What if there are no more rubrics?
And to come up with rubrics for every single category of teachers and specialists. So they suggest that our teachers, music teachers, use the regular rubric. Okay. Districts can change that. They can revise the teacher rubric for their art teachers and music teachers and some of their other teachers as well. And that's all part of the opportunity that districts have to revise or adapt the model. So for our purposes today, we need to be looking at the regular teacher rubric. But if you are in a category that's identified by the department as specialist, I know in a district we talk about specialists being art teachers and music teachers, but on the department level, they talk about specialists being special ed teachers, guidance counselors, and other categories of educators who may not be classroom teachers.
Can I ask a separate question?
Sure.
Under exemplary, in every single category, is the phrase "is able to model this element"?
Right.
What does that mean, and why is it? What does that mean?
Okay, that's a very important point. When the department started looking at what exemplary was, there was a real challenge there. Because the department had decided that proficient was a very high achieving, fully satisfactory level for all educators. And the department has not said that anyone has to be exemplary. But they identified that there are many exemplary teachers in schools. And what they decided as the key difference between being a proficient educator and being an exemplary educator is sharing your knowledge, modeling your knowledge, leading others with and providing opportunities for others to learn from you. And consistently throughout the rubrics, that's what exemplary is. Now this has created a lot of anxiety among a lot of people. Because for years, they have believed and they have been told that they have been outstanding teachers. And yet, maybe modeling wasn't the core to why they were outstanding teachers. They were outstanding teachers in their own classrooms with their students. And now suddenly, in essence, the department is saying, no, you're probably basically a proficient teacher. And that's cause for concern. And it's a cultural shift. And there are going to be a lot of discussions in Sharon around that. There have been a lot of discussions in every district I know of across the state, in any districts where people have begun this process. But one of the things the department was trying to encourage with this kind of a system was that to be a truly exemplary teacher, you need to be helping bring others along with you. And that's what it's about. And it doesn't have to be in any kind of a formal way, although it's nice when districts offer formal opportunities for people to do that. But we all know, I know from my years as a teacher, and I know you all know, that there are people in your departments, on your teams, in your schools, that people look to who have great ideas, who are open to sharing them, who provide model. Maybe they are the ones who get up at a faculty meeting and show something they're doing. Maybe they write about it. Maybe they talk about it. That's what they're referring to. And that's the key difference between proficient and exemplary. Any other questions on that?
Actually, but do you right now want to rate ourselves on all 33 elements?
Right now, I would like you to do this, okay? I would like you, well, what I really basically want you to do is just underline the keywords that you see that fit you in a category. And yes, it will take a few minutes. That's why we have 3 hours today. And as you do that, what's really key is number 3. What's key is that you are thinking about what you would share as evidence, what you know to be the evidence that supports why you chose that rating for yourself, why you see yourself in that way. Addressing. So, step 2 of the 5-step cycle is the goal-setting piece. And the state is requiring that every educator have at least 2 goals. One is a goal of a SMART goal of professional practice, and the other is a SMART goal tied to student learning, achievement, and growth. They're encouraging team goals, and if you're working in a team and decide that you want both your professional practice and your student learning goal to be team goals, that's perfectly acceptable to the state. That's not, the district can also provide direction around the types of goals that they want and the focus of those goals, where they want you to focus on the standards, indicators, and elements. And we do that because it's really important to tie what you're trying to achieve with what the school's trying to achieve and what the district is trying to achieve. Let's talk about the next step. The next step, so I just want to go through the 5-step cycle with you, and then we'll go back and dig deeper into the SMART goals piece of it. Once you've done your analysis, once you've set some goals, and once you've included those goals in the development of your educator plan, then the process will be to implement the plan. And if you're on a 2-year self-directed growth plan, then there'll be a 2-year process of implementation. If you're on a 1-year self-directed growth plan, there'll be a 1-year process. If someone is placed on an improvement plan, it might be of shorter duration. If they're placed on an if they have unsatisfactory and they need to be put on an improvement plan, the law allows it to be quite a short plan, actually. And it doesn't have to be 2 years or 1 year. It can be much shorter in duration. The next part of the 5-step cycle is the formative assessment piece. Formative assessment is mid-cycle, whatever the cycle is. If your cycle's a 2-year cycle, then the formative assessment would come at the end of the first year. If it is a 1-year cycle, the formative assessment would come mid-year. And then finally, there's the summative evaluation. And in that summative evaluation, all teachers will be rated in 4 standards. The 4 standards, they will have a rating. And the rating, of course, goes back to the unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, and exemplary. Does anyone have any questions on that? So, we'll talk a little bit about SMART goals. I paused there because there was a little theatrical music, but I guess the speakers aren't set up so it didn't come off. I was waiting for it. Drum roll, here we are, SMART goals. crucial to the plan. As somebody pointed out earlier, SMART goals, it's an acronym, and there are different ways of breaking it down, but specifically, SMART goals are specific and also strategic. They're measurable, they're attainable, they're also action-oriented, they're results-oriented, they're time-bound, and they can be tracked. It's important in developing SMART goals that you start thinking strategically. What does it mean to think strategically? You have a plan, but in this context, it's important that it's strategically also refers to the fact that this is of significance. You know, people can write SMART goals, but they're not really significant SMART goals. They're not strategic in that they have a major impact. And it's important that your SMART goal, the individual SMART goals, are tied to the school SMART goals and the district SMART goals in order to make sure that this really has impact. And impact is an important piece of writing and identifying those two SMART goals that all educators are asked to do. One of the other things that's important is that it's measurable. And measurable can become difficult. All right, what does measurable mean to you?
You can put a number to it.
Okay, and so generally we think of it being quantifiable. How many of you write goals for yourself now that are quantifiable? You don't have to raise your hand, but chances are many of us have in the past. And now we need to be thinking in those terms. They're attainable, they need to be realistic, but they need to be based on current and past data. And this is why the self-assessment piece is really important, to start looking at who are your students and how well did your students learn and achieve in the past. And they need to be results oriented. It's not a SMART goal, it can't just be an activity. What's important and significant about a SMART goal is the outcome. And they need to be time-bound. There needs to be some kind of way of tracking it. So, take a minute and read this definition of specific and strategic, please. If you could take a minute and take a look at the first bullet. The goal has to relate to a strategic area of need. I had a couple of conversations with people during the break about, looking at the self-assessment and looking at the rubric and then saying, well, we can't really do this because right now we don't have enough data. We need we would need more assessment. So immediately in this self-assessment, somebody has identified perhaps a strategic area of need. And part of that self-assessment piece is doing that, looking and seeing where is the need. Analyzing the data gets to bullet 2. When looking at the student profile data, think about it for a minute. One of the things that's really important that you look at are the gaps. the gaps between what we say our vision is, what Sharon, the vision is for all students in Sharon Public Schools, the vision for all students in Sharon Middle School, and then actually the reality of where your students are currently, and where your students have been in the past and where they have gone to in the past. And where is that gap? This is the areas that should draw your attention in the process, so that you take a look, you see that there is a gap there, and then you think in terms of, well, how do I establish a professional practice goal, a student learning goal that will help close that gap or address that gap? And then, having done that, there's going to now be a clarity of purpose in what you're doing and what you hope to achieve. So let's think a little bit more about measurable. Take a minute and read that slide. It says classroom level goals should use both summative and formative measures. What does that mean to you in your classes?
Smaller measurements, like less formal along the way, and a larger one as more of a benchmark later on.
Right. But you also have those benchmarks all along the way, those formative assessments, okay? Why are formative assessments so important?
They give you an opportunity to adjust what you're doing in your classroom.
We all have an idea what would happen if you taught students, gave no quizzes or tests, no assignments, didn't check any of their work for 3 months, and then gave them a final exam. Okay. We know and understand that the progress wouldn't be where we want it to be. All along the line, day in, day out, it's important to be checking whether students are understanding, comprehending, and learning. What we do with SMART goals is we establish benchmarks for doing that, for measuring that progress. I'm sure many of you use benchmarks currently in your classes in those goals. Does anyone want to share what would be a benchmark that they might use?
I directly support the students and on their class report. I mentioned whether or not they bring the blog, because I believe if they write about them, they learn more detail.
Okay, and then, so how does that tie to what the previous person had said about then you use it to inform what you do?
I have charts on my walls, they can see how many blogging they've made, if they've made none, and a list that I'm walking around with, so to remind myself, so I haven't done them, if I encourage them, what are they making them?
Thank you. And thank you for modeling that for us. Okay. Anyone else have a suggestion?
Could you make a benchmark be something that they now have the ability to do? So, for example, one of the things that I do in my drama class is they get the background to be able to create lighting designs. And so the benchmark would be, can you create a lighting design? Would that work?
So you teach them how to create lighting designs, and then you measure whether they're able to do it. And you do it through a performance assessment, in essence, that you require them to actually do it. And do you rate it or grade it or evaluate it?
They have a different rubric of things that would make it either acceptable or exceptional, or poor, and it has different things that they're checking off, and they use that while they're creating their design.
Okay. So that's correct. Let me ask you a question. That piece of having them create lighting designs, what does that tie to for a bigger goal for the students, more learning?
It has to do with, it's actually hitting some cross-curricular things having to do with science of light and color, and then also with the drama standards having to do with being able to watch an entire production and see the different pieces within it, and use set and light design to create tone and mood on stage. So it's sort of one little piece of a larger part of the standard.
Okay, so the learning outcome is all you just said, and one of the benchmarks that you're monitoring to see that the student is achieving and making progress toward that learning outcome would be that performance assessment on setting up their own light. Okay. Anyone else? So no one else? Oh, sorry.
I don't do this, but I was, because I don't.
But maybe you will.
I don't
Who
teach
knows?
math, but I was thinking in math,
Okay.
they have like unit tests, like a test on a skill that was taught, and then like quizzes in smaller formative assessments along the way. So if you gave a unit test on fractions or something like that, you know, working with mixed numbers, and then that was what all the lessons in formative assessments have led up to, then you can measure what you just taught, and adjust along the way according to those formative ones. And teaching English is a little different, but
Math teachers, could you do that? Does it work? Does anyone in here teach math? Would that work?
Like mini quizzes and, you know, ticket to leave and little things like that, that along the way help you guide your instruction, and I think many of us do that.
Right. Okay. Checking for understanding is an important part of the classroom process. Formative assessment, an important part of the classroom process. And we know that you use it regularly throughout your the year. But it's also important to be thinking in terms of creating SMART goals that will have those benchmarks as well. What's it mean to be action-oriented? Please take a minute and read that. To go. This is, what happens a lot of times is this is the activity, the action piece people don't struggle with so much. They often can identify the activity and the action that they want. Unfortunately, sometimes when people write SMART goals, this is the only thing they write. And it's important to understand that a SMART goal isn't just about an activity. But there is an important piece that it has to be actionable. It has to be action-oriented, results-oriented as well.
Could you give a concrete example of that last slide, please?
for the SMART goal.
About what you have to do and who's going to do it? Okay, say you were teaching science, and one of the things that the needs that you felt was content literacy was an issue for you. You looked at your student data and you thought, well, the students, I'm really kind of struggling with literacy in science, you know, reading the science textbook and understanding writing scientifically. So the action would be, well, how am I going to address that? All right, what action, what am I going to do and I'm going to require them to do in order to address that literacy piece? So you might decide to start with thinking about vocabulary in the content area in science. And maybe part of your SMART goal would be to begin to incorporate teaching content vocabulary in the context, kind of as a set-aside piece. So you might say, I'm going to start teaching content vocabulary, and students I will assess their mastery of content vocabulary on a regular basis. And I will expect by the end of the quarter that the students will show growth to this level. Does that make sense? No.
I guess I'm confused as to the active and the passive, and that just sounds like I don't know.
Can I say, I think,
Right.
you know what, I think we do a great job here. We all have an agenda, we all have our objectives posted, we all have essential and big understandings, and I think, for me, the way I interpret that is like, in your agenda, once you list the activity, the objective, to me, is the active piece, is what kids are going to be able to do because we're doing it. So if we're analyzing a character, they're analyzing a character. If we're doing that because we want them to understand how our lives can be affected by our decisions because of the things characters do, then that's the bigger goal. And I think we try to do that pretty much every day here. So for me, that's how I interpret that active piece. Is that what, like, measurable objectives make that the act? Is that the action?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that obviously you are succeeding and students are meeting outcomes consistently, okay? The difference here is identifying that kind of need, that area of need, and also targeting, writing strategic, specific SMART goals targeted to that area of need. All right. So that is an important piece of this. You have your regular curriculum with your regular units and your regular objectives and outcomes that you would teach, okay? But in the process, what is kind of unique about this is strategic. You're looking at connecting this to a bigger vision. You only have to write 2 SMART goals according to the state. Let's think about that, 2 goals. How many behavioral objectives do you have in a unit? Lots. Right. So they're very, very specific, okay? And part of helping students to understand and learn those is giving them activities that they do that help support that. We're looking at a much bigger piece here. And we're looking to try to meet that need that those regular activities may not be addressing. So this is more strategic in that way.
So the goals start with students will be able to, or I will.
I think that's where my confusion lies. Is this an action for us to do, or is it telling the students this is the action that you'll do to achieve? Thank you, Lord.
You will be asked to write a professional practice goal, and that will involve what you will be doing. But what you will be doing has to be connected to student learning, growth, and achievement, okay? I mean, you went like this, you shrugged, well, yeah, okay. But you would be surprised that sometimes people kind of drop off in that piece. In other words, you might have a teacher who writes a professional practice goal about something they will do, but they haven't really connected that even if they do that, it's somehow going to impact student growth and learning. Okay? And that's an important consideration for the professional practice goal. You have to think ahead what the outcome is. The outcome isn't you doing it. The outcome is how it impacts student learning growth. Okay? So that's the professional practice goal. Then there's a student learning goal. And in the student learning goal, students will be doing something. And they will be doing it at a very measurable rate with benchmarks.
Can I chime in?
Sure.
You know, I've worked with SMART goals in a different context before, but one way I've heard it explained, previously teachers might set a goal. The example I've heard is teachers might set a goal, I'm going to do cooperative groups in my class. That is an action, that's something you're going to do, but making it a SMART goal gives it more of, so that what? What are you doing that for? And the outcome is more, okay, you want students to have a deeper understanding, they're going to have more dialogue, so they're going to have longer term memory, or they're going to have, in your case, they're going to further develop their speaking skills in French. And that's But the action item is we're going to have them speaking to one another more. They're going to do cooperative activities, some of those types of things. So it's that action is what are they going to do? What are those initiatives that are taking place to get towards that broader goal? And then previous goals may have lived in this lane alone without the so that what. I hope that helps a lot.
Yeah, that actually makes perfect sense.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
So can you do what you just did, Mr. O'Rourke, for that content literacy and science? I understood the action, but can you tell me what the goal would be for that? Is the goal to improve reading?
What you might set as a goal, I mean, and again, you're putting me on the spot to think of that, develop that goal, and I want to really sit with science people and look at it, but we can pull good examples of SMART goals and some examples of SMART goals that are not yet and work with them. As we work with this stuff, it's going to be a process to refine it. One thing that I heard when I went to training on this is we're not all going to be perfect on these at our first few cracks at them, so it'll be time to develop it. But on my...
A goal could be, I want to improve my students' reading skills in science, and I'll do that by focusing on content vocabulary. Is that like...
A little bit. You're going to want to, when you want to improve, what you'll want to do is define, I want to improve their content reading skills. And then you're going to want to think about, within this statement, I'm going to measure that through, just measure the, common assessment done across my discipline that we use of some sort. And have a baseline. Do you have any baseline knowledge of where their skills are? Some of those types of things. And then it's building into what are my initiatives, what are my activities that I'm going to do to improve their, focus on their vocabulary. A really guided instructional piece working with them on content area reading. Ruthie?
This clarification is really helpful, but I have to say for me, I feel like I'm getting like pieces of a puzzle like this, and I haven't seen the big picture. It would be silly if you were going to share us like at the end, like a model, educator plan, and then we could go back and see how the put together. That would help me to sort of see what an end result might look like from this plan. I think it would help me understand.
Kevin, can I just... One of the things for me that is helpful is when we write IEPs, we use the SMART goal model. So we think about, measurable, attainable. And I think in terms of creating our own SMART goals, I would use an IEP as a template and thinking about what are the needs within the classroom in terms of what the students need, and then maybe develop your own goals based on pulling out some of the information from there. The language is in the IEP. The objectives are there, and that could be a good place as far as a starting point to figure out what is it that I want to focus on for my growth plan.
I think that's an excellent point. And again, just quickly about the science literacy piece, you would need to identify that that's a need. Okay, so we're really talking about some type of either pre or post assessment, whether it's a classroom assessment or whether it's a district-wide assessment. So content literacy is a piece that's part of the new Common Core standards. And science, math, social studies, English. So,
Would some of your goals begin with, I will continue to blank? Or are they all is everything from scratch, or if you know there is a need for something, you've identified it in the past, but you're already doing that, would your goal be to continue with that? Or is everything brand new?
I would assume, no. You would be looking at a need that you need to address. If you remember, going back to, we're talking basically about two goals to begin with. So if you are doing something, it's assumed you will continue to do it. It may have been a previous SMART goal that you had and you will continue to do it. But now it's what other glaring areas of need or gaps are there that are jumping out at you? And what do I now need to begin to do to address that?
Can a goal, as I'm thinking of this stuff, I don't know if I have a lot of concrete data data to begin, as a baseline. Can a goal be to develop these baselines?
It can certainly be to identify assessments or develop assessments that will help give you that baseline data, yes. That could be a professional practice. Your team may decide that, or your science department may decide, we really need some pre and post tests. Maybe content literacy is something we're interested in, so maybe what we can do as part of our professional practice would be to develop pre and post assessments and give them to students, analyze that. But before we do that, we're just not going to sit down and do that. We're going to research it. We're going to find out what the best practice is. We're going to discuss it and collaborate on it. And then as a team, we will come up with these assessments that we will then be able to use, and that will provide us with data. And in some cases, you might be able to do that at the same time. You might be able to develop those, give them, use them. So you might be able to connect your professional practice goal of developing and giving those assessments with your student learning goal of students improving in content literacy at a certain rate using these assessments. Okay. We're going to go through some examples too. So just very quickly, rigorous, realistic, and result. It's really important that they be rigorous. People need to stretch when they write these goals. On the other hand, you don't want to create a goal that's not achievable. And you don't want to create one that will be just incredibly frustrating for everyone. That will be counterproductive. So you need to strive to make it rigorous, but it also needs to be reachable. And results. You want results. You want to see those students improve and grow and achieve in a particular area.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If you're on a 2-year plan, how do you, when kids are gone after a year, how does that work with data and collection after they leave us?
Okay, first of all, if you're on a 2-year plan, you'll still do a formative assessment at the end of the first year.
Right.
Okay, to see your goals, in essence, will be for 2 years. So you will start out looking at the students you have, but you always also look at previous students as well. So it will be a 2-year plan. And how
do I look for that growth?
you would look for the growth in your formative assessment at the end of the first year.
So really, it's kind of like doing it twice, really, with 2 different groups of students.
If you have different groups of students, yeah. But one of the reasons it would be really helpful in many ways to be on a 2-year plan is when you do that formative assessment, it's going to inform you about whether something worked or didn't work. And then that provides you with the opportunity to decide, how should I adjust this?
So my students will be different, so I can't necessarily assume that it wouldn't work with a different population.
Right, so what you would hope is that even though you're on a 2-year plan, that goal, you would have benchmarks throughout the year that you've adjusted throughout the year. And that's an important piece, that you don't wait till the whole end of the first year.
Can I comment on two things? One is that I think there's some onus on our responsibility as administrators to make sure we do some work on student profiles. I would say not as successfully as I would have liked. I think there's an onus on us to get data out to you and to we talk in the district and where you can talk about how we're doing that. So that's number one. It's in your classroom, but it's also there's some data we've been talking about how we share that, about prior students coming to you and the students that you had in your prior classroom. The second piece, in terms of clarity, I know this was shared with administrators. The DESE has wonderful resources that teachers can access, and either you or Kevin or I can send a link to you, in your spare time. If you want to, but it gives you big, I heard a lot of people talk about big picture. It gives you some big picture things, it gives you some resources to explore that there's no way possible to do in a few hours or this afternoon, so we can send it out to you as well.
Okay, so they obviously need to be timed and you need to be able to track them. And the goal has to include a time frame for when the goal is to be accomplished. And without an appropriate time frame, there's no urgency for the work to be done. So there are basically two types of goals that we're talking about. A professional practice goal, your practice in relationship to performance standards, and then specific improvement in student learning and growth. When developing these two goals, you will need to prioritize. They need to be tied to what the district goals are, what the school goals are, or what the team goals are. And again, as I've been saying repeatedly, they need to be connected to student learning and growth and achievement. The district may tell you that they want to, this is happening in some districts, focus on some particular standards or indicators for your goals. Teaching all students may be a priority. It is a priority in some districts, and that may be a priority. I did happen to notice that your district goals include teaching all students. Focus on that, meeting the needs of all students. Your school goals include meeting the needs of all students. So that may be seen as a major priority for Sharon, and you may be asked to develop one or both of your goals around that. But the administrators will assist you in developing those when the time comes. Okay? And they'll give you some guidance around that. I don't know if you want to add anything, Kevin? So, this is to be strategic. It is to be connected. And so the district and school and professional practice and student learning goals are all connected. Now, there are plenty of goals out there that people think are SMART goals, but for one reason or another really aren't. They don't meet these requirements. They can't be monitored. They're not actionable. They're not agreed upon. They're not tracked. They're not realistic. They're not results. So, take a look at these SMART goals for a minute. Please notice there's a significant difference between the school and even the school goal and then those of the team and even in some cases with the individual goal. Somebody explain, how does that individual goal connect with the 8th grade team goal? Or does it?
Can kids enjoy reading more, then they're more engaged, so they would probably do better on an assessment.
Is that a goal that shows student growth and learning? How many think it does? Raise your hand. The individual goal.
It shows
Student growth and learning.
No, student enjoyment.
But how do we define growth? Is it just cognition? Is it emotional growth? Is it motivational growth? I mean, how do we define growth?
Well, the answer is you're not sure. So if you're not sure, it's not meeting what it needs to meet. Correct? Now, if there was something in that that did recognize the connection between that and increased student learning and improved reading, then that's fine. It would include that, but it doesn't. So let's take a look at a few more. Here's 4 SMART goals. Why don't you take a look at them just quickly? I'm going to be asking you in a few minutes by show of hands whether or not you think they are SMART goals.
More or less
have a target. One of the things we have to keep in mind is everybody doesn't achieve their SMART goal. So, you know, the goal is to, here's a goal, you set a rigorous and attainable goal. There may be times when, for one reason or another, and that's part of the growth process for the educator, to review and understand, well, what was it? Did I set it too high? Did I not do enough? And that's part of the monitoring piece of it. It's also the reason it's so important to have that student profile data to begin with, because you need to know who your students are before you, and you need to know something about them before you write these kinds of goals.
Just to piggyback on what you just said, how does the attaining of your SMART goal tie to your own evaluation? How does that make me proficient or not proficient or unsatisfactory in some way?
It's a piece of the overall rating that you will receive, but it is not a standalone piece. Okay, and part of the SMART goals and the part of this evaluation process that makes it really different in many schools than previous evaluations, not all schools, and I can't say that I know what Sharon did in the past, but in many schools, is that back and forth conversation. And also that piece around the formative assessment, the mid-cycle, where somebody is looking and saying, hey, here's where I am, I haven't reached this, what do I need to do now as I move forward? This is why benchmarks are so important.
At what point in the year would you come up with a SMART goal? If you really need to know your students like pretty well.
You need to come up with a SMART goal as the beginning, because it's part of the plan, and you just need to start with it. So it's step 2. Now, as you go through the process, obviously, you're going to have to look at that. So again, it's very difficult in the first years, and I think, Kevin, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I think the fact of the matter is, when you think about it, it's going to take some time.
Certainly in your first year, you're going to have some, as Joe was identifying, where do you set that number? And sometimes it may feel a little arbitrary. I think you may have some, if you have any data, the ability to do pre-assessments with your kids as they come in the year. You have data from what they did in previous grades that may inform what is your starting point, what is a reasonable benchmark? Is 85% the benchmark that you want to set, or is 75%? You may know, and it may adjust, but I also want to reiterate, if you work towards your goal and you do things and you find you don't achieve that number, your post-assessment's unachieved, does that mean it was not worthwhile, or some of the things that you implemented weren't worthwhile? I would say no. I mean, maybe you understand that you need to do something different, and I think that if we're thinking about what we learned from what doesn't work, that is valuable as what we learned from what does work. So it's certainly a growth process. It's not that, oh my goodness, my students didn't achieve, I'm not doing a good job, and I'm a horrible teacher. I think we learn from what works and what doesn't work, and we adjust. So that's part of the frame that, yes, it is an element of it, but I think if you're reflective on what's working and what's not working, that makes you a stronger teacher in the long term. So I think that's an element. I don't want people to get caught up in saying, I have to have my data all be perfect. It may not be, and that's okay. You'll know more as you get deeper into it. Katie?
When we come up with these, we have a meeting review,
Yep, you'll have some time to work with them on your own. You'll sit down with coordinator administrators to review and have dialogue about, and potentially go back and continue to refine and then agree upon and sign off.
I want to go back to just setting the goals. We're supposed to use it on data of students coming into, but if you're working for 2 years, you're going to have 2 different sets of students with different needs. How do you?
You're still setting it on working on student learning goals though. And all your kids are coming in and working towards standards, getting them to achieve standards. So even though you maybe, you know, different sets of kids each year, you're still trying to get all kids to achieve standards.
And I think, too, another step in there, maybe, and Kevin, you can tell me if you don't think this will apply, and Sharon, but at that, on a 2-year cycle, that formative assessment, at that point, there may be some adjustment made in the SMART goal for year 2. Okay? So, and in the mid-year cycle for 1 year, there may be some adjustment made in that cycle, and that's part of the conversation, and that's part of having this formal formative assessment built in, so that you can be looking and saying, well, maybe we need to do this. The other thing I think it's really important is to think in these terms. We're talking about a huge need that you've identified, something of real significance. So this is a priority that you've set. And when you set that priority, what are the limits that you're willing to accept as not meeting that? Okay, so in other words, if this is, it reminds me a lot around curriculum, that essential question piece of doing curriculum. Here's the big goal you have for this class. And if they're not meeting it, if it's a high priority goal, then you're going to adjust because you're going to decide, well, they need to do that to move on. So the numbers may be higher than, right now you may be looking at it and saying, gee, 75% seems like a huge group. But this is because this is a crucial goal that you set, and this outcome needs to be met by the vast majority of your students.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of this is, I don't know, an elementary teacher who's teaching always teaches the same content, but we have different courses every year, we have different levels every year, so I think the continuity from one year to the next could be difficult.
You may have to, Kathy's question is, some people teach, switch content, switch a course.
Switch course, switch level.
Switch a level. There'd certainly have to be an adjustment. If you're you know, continuous in the same content, then probably, you know, over 2-year span, you're okay. But if you're teaching 12th graders 1 year and 9th graders the next, you're going to have to adjust in your goals and all of those measures.
I'm just wondering if your SMART goal can wind up being the same, because even if you teach the same level or the same course, you're getting all new students that you still want to have. 75% of all students doing X, Y, and Z year after year. I mean, the percent might change or you might adjust it, but I'm thinking that a SMART goal could really be a long-range goal for a particular course.
Good. Brittany, did you have something?
You mentioned it, but I just want to make sure that once we sign off on our goal, it's not like carved in stone. Like, we can meet with you, like, as we go through the year, and I'm like, oh, wow, I need to seriously readjust now that I know my students even better. And I'm not lowering expectations, but maybe modifying, you know, where the class is headed. Like, we can, you know, like, revise goals and, like, a little bit.
I would certainly assume yes. The question is, can you revise a goal? You set a goal in September, and come January, you want to revisit that goal with Jackie or I and say, here's what I learned, here's how I want to adjust it. Certainly I'm open to that, and we would relook at it and redefine it.
Also, keep in mind on that, setting that limit, you also want past student data. So you can look and see, well, what have you achieved in the past with your students? That's part of where that number comes from. If you have test results, and then you can go back and say, gee, on this assessment, this district-wide or department-wide or team assessment, in the past, my students have basically achieved by the end 75% of this. And so this year, I want to continue that. My students may be coming in with a few more challenges, so it's going to be a little harder for me, but I'm going to stay at that level. But you're right, you can't just take it, you know, off the top of your head. Looking at that's why it's important to look at your students who are coming in now, but also, what have you been able to achieve with your previous students?
This is for like overall to get the vision. So I come in and next year I self-assess myself. Then I make my goals, and then in addition I'm having my 2 regular observations that
No.
year, or that doesn't happen anymore.
That will change.
That will change. Okay. All right.
And in that process, the third step actually, after, is that you are put on a plan.
Yeah, I
Okay.
get that, but I was
Okay.
just wondering, then, just that sort of like, you know, where's also that component of, because I'm getting evaluated on all this stuff, not just my goals. So then what happens with all this effort? You fill this out too for us, right? And that's at the end of the 2 years? Or does this, you filling this out for us happen, like, I have to get evaluated next year, so does that happen for me next year? Or at the end of my 2-year plan?
Depends on which plan you're on.
Okay, so that, okay.
And that rubric is used as part of the observation, and the observation might be an observation in the classroom, but it might be other observations.
So the observations happen, but now they're more informal, like the admin is just coming in and just doing more informal observations?
The state has moved to more frequent and less, in shorter periods of time.
Okay.
So there may be, and it's still to be agreed upon locally, but it'll likely be somewhere around 10 observations instead of 2. And instead of a full class period, it may be like 10 minutes. And again, those are not fixed numbers or agreed upon numbers, but that's tends to be what's the norm in other districts around the state, somewhere in that range. So it's still, you know, right now you're observed for 2 45-minute periods, it's 90 minutes. Instead of just 2 snapshots, it's 10-minute snapshots for 100 minutes. So it's really not a sum total difference, but it's 10 snapshots of time with briefer elements of feedback versus a long write-up thing.
In the collection of evidence, the educator is now directly involved in that as well. They're helping to collect their own evidence to show and demonstrate that they've achieved certain goals, and that also that they have met certain knowledges and performance standards based on the rubric. So you're also gathering that. And what I've heard throughout the state from districts and
From this, for 10 minutes, and these, and then another 10.
the details of all of that are part of the contract negotiations. Okay? And they vary from district to district. Some are very specific, some are more general. Anyone else? Okay, we need to make sure we have some time for you to work on writing some SMART goals, and it's already 3 o'clock, so we're going to kind of jump through some of this. There are 2 SMART goals up there, but what I would call your attention to are the questions to think about. Because, and this goes to your point, that these are the goals, but what are the strategies and the action steps you need to achieve them? They're actionable goals, but the action steps aren't outlined in the goal. Who will be responsible? All right, this is all part of the plan for the implementation of the goals. What will the complete timeline be? The goal has to be time-bound, but the details of the timeline will be part of the plan for the goal. How will we know if you're successful? How will we report your findings? How will you report your findings? Okay. There are 2 templates that you should have available to you online, or
There's hard
there's some hard copies. They are the educator's goal template, which if you look at the top, it calls for a SMART goal. It calls for standards, indicators, element, which standard, indicator, and element, the strategies for attaining that goal, the resources you need, the timeline, and the evidence of accomplishment. Okay? That's for 2 goals, professional practice goal and a student learning goal, student outcome. There's that template that maybe you look at and think, ooh, I like that one. And there's this template. And you get to choose which one you want to use now for this last section. In this template, notice it's the other reference, specific and strategic. It breaks out the goal. What could you measure? What action, the results, and the time and tracking, how it's going to be timed and tracked. And so you will have approximately 20, 22 minutes to develop 2 SMART goals, one for professional practice and one for student outcomes. And you can do this as a team. So we're going to be leaving this room, and you'll be going to the rooms that have been designated. But before you go, just a couple of quick things, and I know time's of the essence here. You're going to be breaking off by teams, and I believe Kevin can give you more information about that. You look at either slide 39 or 40, those two templates. You develop a professional practice goal. You remember the key components. Okay, it's going to be a team goal. What questions do you have? We'll go back to that. You've received this, it's links so that you can do some further investigation. But before you leave, and I'll be circulating among the rooms, we will ask that you complete this. Now, this is a ticket to leave. So after you've shared your SMART goals, and we're going to try to share them within the group when you move there, you will need to fill out the last page of the PowerPoint. If you don't have it, there will be index cards I will pass around, and you can just fill out the index card. But before you leave, we ask that you do a ticket to leave where you talk about one takeaway from this training, one question you still have, and one support you could use.
In this 20 minutes, you're not writing your SMART goals for next year. You're taking a crack at drafting what is it like to try to form a SMART goal.
Okay.
So, but you can think more specifically to your content areas. Crafting your goal will be time that you'll need more than 20 minutes to think about. So this is an opportunity to talk with a few colleagues, take a crack at something within your content that you would just practice a little bit, having some time to put down on paper and practice that drafting of a goal that fits this criteria. You're not creating your SMART